And welcome back to me channel. I bet you didn't think I owned a shirt that was not black, did you? My name is Rusty, and this is me channel where I talk about me favorite movies, mostly horror, and me favorite music, mostly metal. And welcome back as I continue my foray into the Omen franchise. This is one of my favorite shirts. First of all, it's silk. Yes. Very smooth. It also clings to you like a fucking leotard. But yes, this is Damien, Omen II. This is my Damien Omen II shirt, which is, go try to find one. They're very hard to find. And this is one of my favorite shirts. And it's silk. So, yes. Damien Omen II was released in 1978, and it stars William Holden, Lee Grant, I love Lee Grant, and Jonathan Scott Taylor. My favorite other role of Lee Grant is In the Heat of the Night with Sidney Poitier. But yes. So, as I said, Damien Omen II was released. Color correction was required. So Damien was released in 1978. This is the Blu-ray. It's in the Omen Collection Blu-ray. I also have this cool DVD of it. Damien Omen III is my favorite of the four films. It is my favorite of the franchise, and I just love Damien Omen II. So, this movie opens 1 week, just 1 week after the events of the Omen II, in which we see Bugenhagen warning about Damien again to his friend Mike, his friend Mike, and begging him, who is an archaeologist, and begging him to come and look at what he found. That he found Egel's wall, which has Damien's face on it. And he wants him to come see. He's the Antichrist. We have to stop him. So he takes Mike to the archaeological dig where he shows him the wall. And sure enough, it does have, Damien from the first movie. His face, it looks just like him. And what's weird is that every year, as Damien's appearance changes, so does his face on the wall to match exactly the way he looks now. So it's sort of a living painting. It's weird. So he shows him that, and now they both believe. And of course, then they are stopped because they are buried alive in that archaeological dig and killed so that they can't take it. So prior to doing that, though, he had sent out the knives to Damien's new parents before he went, and they did this little trip into his archaeological dig. So Rob's brother, Richard, is who has now been raising him. So he takes him to the ancient, shows him the ancient wall. It's got Damien's face on it. They're both buried alive. And then we springboard to 7 years later. In Chicago, Damien is leaving with his cousin Mark to go to the military academy where they go to school. So this movie is one of those that takes place in a military academy, sort of like Child's Play 3 and Taps. I like movies set in a military academy. It's kind of cool. There's not many of them, and this is one of them. So he's leaving with his cousin Mark. You can tell very early, almost instantly, that his Aunt Marion, who is Richard's sister, absolutely hates Damien. And we're fixing to find out a little more about that. So, while Mark and Damien go on to school, we see Charles and Marion. Charles is like the curator of the Thorn Museum. And we see Aunt Marion, and we see Richard and Anne. And they're having dinner. When Marion starts, saying, "I've got something to say," she then informs him that she owns 27% of Thorn Industries and the museum, and that she will leave it all to charity instead of him if he does not take them out of school, send them to different schools, and keep Mark away from Damien. So he gets very, very angry, and Anne gets very, very angry. "I want that bitch out of my house." There's a big fight, and she goes on up to bed, whereas, he's like, "We'll make her leave," because Anne is furious. So that night, she's gonna give her part of Thorn Industries to charity if they don't separate Mark and Damien. Richard and Anne watch a slideshow with Charles, who is the curator of the Thorn Museum, of some of the finds at that dig, because now they're digging up, where Bugenhagen and Mike were buried alive. They're actually digging that place up now, and they're watching slideshows of all of the cool stuff that they found in there. We are introduced to Sergeant Niff, who is played by Lance Heinrichsen, which is very cool to see him so young, But yeah, so the sergeant is the new platoon leader of Damien's platoon and is played by Lance Heinrichsen, who does a wonderful job. And of course you're like, is he a servant? Because one of the fun things about the Omen and the Omen II, especially the Omen II and Omen III, is that trying to figure out who's in on the game and who's not, because they're really subtle about it. So you don't really know whether Sergeant Niff is a protector of Damien or not at first. So you're introduced to him. Then that night you see a big giant crow come into Marion's room, where it scares her to death and causes her to have a heart attack. So, So the crow causes Marion to have a heart attack and die. Sergeant Niff is the new master of Damien's platoon. He meets them outside and gets, introduces himself. Anne ends up finding Marion dead. And while we see Richard being taken on a tour of the Thorn Industries by their development manager, Paul, played by Robert Forster. Now, who later married, he was really famous for Flamingo Road. No, Falcon Crest. And he also was the husband of Elizabeth Montgomery up until her death. So that's, who that is. Just a little trivia for you. I'm always happy to give you a little trivia. So Paul is telling them about this new plan that he has to buy up land all over the world, especially in undeveloped countries. Basically, he wants to control the food supply. If you control the food supply, then you control the population. Richard and Bill are like, no, that's immoral, Oh no, we want to help. We want to stop famine. Sure you do, Monsanto. So, they do that. We get to see Damon use his powers for the first time on this bully asshole who slaps Mark at school. Because the dude is making fun of their heritage. their grandfather and fathers all come from this academy, and you think you're hot shit. So we see Damien use his powers to sort of make him start squealing and falling on the floor and slapping himself in the face and stuff like that. It was pretty cool, actually. And Mark then asked him, like, what did you do to him? And he's like, I don't know. I just was pissed at him, and that's what happened. So we're introduced to Joan, who is a reporter, who is friends with Charles, who has been hanging around with Bugenhagen, or, who knew Bugenhagen as well. And she's been doing a story on Thorn Industry, and she wants to interview Richard. So she was also friends with the photographer, Jennings, from the first movie. He was a photographer, she's a reporter, so she was friends with him. So she's kind of been watching the Thorns ever since, So she does end up meeting, she sort of ambushes him and meets him as he's going to the airport, Richard. And she actually spills the conspiracy theory. So this is the person that tells Richard about it. Damien's the Antichrist, you have to stop it, all of that kind of stuff. So instead of a priest like the first one, it's this reporter, Joan, who tells Richard about Damien's heritage, shall we say. I'd love to see like a 23andMe, right? Like Ancestry.com. Can you imagine? What would his genetic readout be, I wonder? Your pack came from Mongolia. Your pack? Yeah, the pack of jackals you have partially your blood in. So it would be an interesting readout. So she talks to him. She tells him the theory. Of course, he gets absolutely freaked out and throws her out of the car and stuff like that. He ends up telling Anne about it and explains it to her, and she's like, screaming about it. We also see Charles and Anne talking about Egel's Wall, which is like the big find. Now, we know what Egel's Wall has on it. None of them do, however, but it's being shipped over to the museum. So, we see Charles and Anne talking about that, and we kind of know, what's going to happen when he sees that. So, Joan shows up, frantic about Damien, but ends up then leaving because she doesn't really know what to say, so she kind of gets like discombobulated. She kind of does what Mitch McConnell did in his last two press conferences, where, hi, what color is the sky? That's kind of what she does. What's wrong with Damien? What are you talking about? Damien's That's kind of what that scene is like. So she goes to school because she you kind of know why she froze like that, because she hasn't seen Damien. She's seen the wall though, but she hasn't seen Damien. So she goes to school because she wants to get a look at him. And when she does, she of course freaks the fuck out when he takes his football helmet off. She freaks out because seen that face before, and she takes off and starts running, driving down the road when her car stalls out. And then there's that fantastic scene where she is attacked by the Crow. And some scenes in this movie remind me of Stephen King's The Stand, because that Crow, Randall Flagg, was always hanging around. So there was like a lot of scenes in this movie where I'm like given a flashback to The Stand. So this Crow like attacks the fuck out of her, and it looks so real, and he like rips her eyes out, And then she walks up onto the road and gets completely obliterated by a semi-truck that is not in any way going slow. So we are then treated to Mark's birthday. We see Paul talk to Damien a little fishy, and I'm like, is he on the game? You know? So he offers Damien a tour of Thorn Industries because he's like, you're going to own it one day anyway. And he's like, you mean me and Mark are going to own it? And he's like, oh yeah, of course. And that's what made me go, look, I was like 14 and a half, 15 when I saw this for the first time. So I was like, don't you dare hurt either one of them, right? Perspective. Kids' perspectives are entirely different than adults. I can attest to that, because who would have a crush on the Antichrist? It's because I really didn't think about it that way. You know what I'm saying? So when I was 15, I wasn't actually thinking about it that way. I was just thinking, oh my God. So hormones everywhere. So Paul is, offers him a plant, and I put servant ? Yeah, because, I'm starting to wonder about him. Ann and Charlie talk again. Charles, talk again about Joan's death, and then we are treated to the hockey game that they take place on the frozen lake. It's at this time that we do see that crow again, and we see Bill go outside of the bounds into the thin ice, and he falls into the lake. Now, Bill is the president of Thorn Industries. Richard's the owner, but Bill is the president, and Paul is the second, whatever they call that, assistant president, vice president, whatever. So, Bill falls in the ice. They try so hard to rescue him, but they can't. And then, boom, now Paul is the president. So Paul is going to get to, carry out those plans that he wants to. This clears the way for Paul's plan for Thorn Industries and the food supply control. Now, since he's president, Damien has a showdown with with a teacher in class because he laughed, and so the teacher brought him up there to humiliate him. Like, you're not paying attention in class and you're laughing in class, so answer the question. Well, he starts answering the questions until that teacher's mind, it like really frazzled him because, he was popping off answers and they were all correct. When all of a sudden Sergeant Neff shows up at the door and hollers at him and stops it. And he's like, come here. So he goes outside and he goes to Sergeant Neff's office, and Neff is like, what the hell are you doing? He's like, I don't know. I was just answering the questions. I just knew them all. And then Neff accuses him of showing off, and that he didn't need to do that and bring attention to himself. And that's when I was like, okay, you are on the game. I know you're on the game. So now I know that Paul and Sergeant Neff, I know that they are both one of his crew, Because Damien never knows who his crew is. His crew just shows up and starts taking care of him like Miss Blaylock did in the first one. So, once that happens, I put he's also a servant, yeah. So he tells him to read Revelations to know what he is, because Damien was like, what do you mean, what I am, and stuff like that. So Damien really does not know and has never known until this moment in this movie who and what he is. And that's because Neff tells him to go read Revelations and he will understand who he is and what he is. Now, so he does that, and he's not very happy about it. He's very upset. He's screaming, he's crying at the lake, like, Why me? What? You know? Of course, that doesn't last too long. I mean, you might be a little upset at finding out you're the Antichrist, but what you gonna do? You know? Might as well enjoy it. Right? So, but he really is hurt and upset at first when he finds out. So I thought that was a neat character development, was to show him for the first week or so being very, very scared, very upset, and very afraid. And I think that was very appropriate for the character. So we then see Presarian, who is one of their chief scientists at the facility, telling Paul that there's been a bunch of murders and the places where they've tried to buy land, and that, you know, Paul acts all surprised about it, like, what do you mean? And he's like, you know, well, we're offering these people to buy their land, and those that are refusing are being murdered. And he's like, oh, well, I'll have to investigate that. And I'm like, yeah, you're the motherfucker who's doing that, you know. That's what I'm saying. So, Damien brings his classmates for the tour that Paul had promised, and he can tell, or maybe Paul had told him, I don't know, but he can tell that Presarius is a threat to Thorn Industries. And so he causes a malfunction in the machine, in one of the vats, that causes all of this poisonous gas to be released. And it was a very ugly kill. Presarius and that other guy that was at the valve when it blew up. So all the kids got out fine, though. They only had just a tiny bit of damage. However, Damien was not damaged at all. So the malfunction killed Pretorius, and all the kids were injured, except for Damien. Now, the doctor, who actually is that, I can't think of his name. What was his name? Anthony? Or something like that. I can't think of it. But do you remember the show Designing Women? With Annie Potts and Delta Burke and all them? The black guy that was their friend in Designing Women, that's who this doctor is. So the doctor was really confused, and he even tells Richard and Anne, you know, he's like, look, all the other kids had this small bit of damage to their lungs and stuff, but Damien was not affected at all. So he's kind of suspicious. And they're like, well, good. He didn't get damaged. That was good. Right? So he does let him go home because he wants to keep him, but they're like, he doesn't want to stay. So they do let him go home. Now he's very curious, right? So he's like looking it up, and he's looking at his blood, and he's trying to figure out why he had no lung or blood damage there, you know, and he's very confused about what he sees, and he's like looking it up in his like hemoglobin book, and you see him like call his a colleague and was like, look, dude, I got to come and show you something, because when they showed you the page on the book, the cell structure was like jackal, right, instead of human. And it was like a human jackal mix. And so we then get what a great many people who love this movie consider their favorite scene. And that is the elevator scene, because the doctor, he goes up to see his colleague when, of course, the elevator is taken over. It goes all the way to the top, then it slams all the way to the bottom, knocks him to the floor, and he's laid there just, you know, pretty much half knocked out when the brace line breaks at the top of the building. So you have these two sliders coming down with rebar, not rebar, but you know what I mean. That big, thick steel line comes down, goes through the elevator, and cuts him in half, and they show it. It's a excellent kill scene. And most people that I've seen, they pick the elevator kill as their favorite kill in this movie. And it's not the most disturbing kill scene in this movie to me, but it is my favorite kill scene, but it's not the most disturbing. And we'll get to that. So the doctor is killed in the elevator, a very infamous scene. He's cut in half. Anne and Richard read about the doctor in the papers the next day, and Richard tells about Damien being different, and his suspicions are beginning. Charles receives that box, right? He receives the box that had been meant to be sent to Richard 7 years ago. Well, because it's found in all of Bugenhagen's stuff, and it's found in the archaeological dig. So he receives that, he opens it up, and there's these knives, and there's the original letters that Bugenhagen had written to Richard about Damien. So he reads them, and he gets scared. He gets scared about it. And he receives the knives and Bugenhagen's notes about the theory, and he goes to see Richard, and he asks about his brother, Robert. And all the while, because they're in their little projection room, Mark is sitting right up there in the projection room where he had been undoing the movie that they had just watched. So he is overhearing Charles tell Richard all of this shit that he read in that letter, in those letters from Bugenhagen. So he tells him about Egel's wall, and Richard, of course, doesn't believe any of this. And he's like, you're all full of shit, and I'm not going to believe the rantings of some crazy drunk archaeologist, stuff like that. And Charles is like, well, I'm going to go look. And he's like, yeah, you do that. You go look at this wall when it comes and let me know. So the damage is done, though, because Mark heard all of this, and Mark is only a 14-year-old kid, right? So he is very scared of Damien now. And then we have him go for a walk the next morning out into the woods. And, Richard sees him go out there. And then later on, he sees Damien walk by the window as well. But Damien shows up. Now, Anne is at this point that Richard gives that letter that Charles had gave him from Bugenhagen to Anne and lets Anne read it. And Anne is like freaking out, you can't possibly believe this shit. Are you going to treat Damien worse because of this? No, I'm not. I don't believe it. Well, you better not, so they have this like thing. So Damien follows Mark out there into the woods, and you can hear him like calling for him, and he's like, why are you running from me, and stuff like that. Well, Mark just unloads. He like confronts Damien, and he tells him all that stuff that Richard had been told by Charles, and it gets to the point where Damien has to admit it, and he then tells Mark how much he is in love with him, how much he loves him, and that he can come with him, he can be by his side as he takes over the world. So it's like, talk about a deal with the devil, right? So he tells him all of this, and Mark is scared, and Mark refuses. And he asks him once, and then he asks him twice. And all this time he's telling him how much he loves him, and he would never hurt him, and, all of this stuff. And then Mark refuses, and he causes him to have an embolism. And it was an extremely horrible thing to watch. It was very, and that's what I was saying a while ago, is that the elevator scene, as far as a pure kill, is my favorite. But the most upsetting and disturbing kill scene was Mark's kill scene when Damien killed him. You know, Damien like busted the vessels in his brain, and it was so. Mark played it really good. The actor played it really good because it was so painful and it looked so horrible. So that's my most disturbing kill scene in the movie, was that one. But the most brutal was, well, not like that's not brutal, but you know what I'm saying. We have to rank these things. We're movie collectors. It's just what we do. So the elevator is my favorite of this movie, but the Mark scene is the most disturbing to me and caused me the most discomfort and upsetness. So Anne and Richard come running because Damien starts crying and screaming at what he's done. So there is a lot of regret and everything, because I think he did love Mark and now he just murdered him. And so Anne and Richard, but when the rattlesnake bites you because you push it into a corner and step on it, the rattlesnake doesn't hate you. Understand? Are you getting me? The rattlesnake doesn't hate you. You fucked with the rattlesnake. It's defending itself. And it will do that until you kill it. That's what Damien is. He's like this. He's a beast. He's the beast. Right? So, but he still felt horrible regret and screaming. And so Anne and Richard came. And you see the funeral. And yes, I got lost. We see the funeral. Richard goes then to see Charles, because now that this has happened, granted Damien isn't their son, but Mark was his son. And so he's like, Charles has called. He's got to go see Charles because some priest called him and told him, man, your friend Charles, the curator of your museum, he's fucking like locked himself in a monastery room here at our monastery, at our church, and he won't come out, and you've got to come and see him. So Richard goes up there to see Charles, and Charles informs him, and boy is he in a state, and Charles informs him that he has seen the wall and that he's scared to death. He's like, his room now looks like the priest's from the first one with all of the pictures and the crosses and everything. So he tells him that it's all true, that he saw the wall. And then Richard, of course, still doesn't believe him. But, Charles, he's like, take me and show me. So he takes Richard out to see it at this train. And that's a good kill as well, because Charles is too scared to go around and go into the train. So he goes to the front. Why any fool is going to sit on a car lock, I don't know. But that's where he was standing. And I thought, well, that's not a good place to stand. But so Richard went around, went in, saw the wall, and it is Damien's face as he exists right now. Meanwhile, while he was doing that, though, a train kicks into gear and is coming, and it rams into that train car. Remember, this is the back, and this is the front. So Charles had went around and was standing at the train lock, and Richard had come into the back, went in there, saw the wall, and then the train comes and hits it, which busts the wall, because Richard had took down the protective covering, busts the wall and sends the train hurtling forward, which cups Charles in the clip, in the... I'm not a train conductor. I can't tell you what they're called. The train clasp, and runs him into the next one. So he was like crushed. Yeah. So Richard comes around and sees that. And now he knows that this is all true. So Richard is now a believer. We're shown Damien's graduating at school and getting the Best Cadet Award. Anne meets Richard at the airport, and they go to the museum where he sends for Damien. He tells his guy to go get Damien and bring him. She, of course, doesn't know what's going on and wants to know why are they doing this. He tells her as they go into the curator's room where he has all of Bugenhagen's stuff, Charles. And he's looking for those knives. And he's telling Anne this the whole time. What he saw, what he thinks, what he believes, and that he's got to kill Damien. And she, of course, is screaming and hollering at him to stop, that she won't allow it, stuff like that. So he's looking for these knives, and he does manage to find them in a drawer, and he lays them on the desk. And she starts arguing with him more, and he's like, give me those knives. So she turns around. Now Damien has arrived and is actually hearing them outside argue about this. The room. So she grabs those knives and she turns around and she's like, here's your knives. And she just runs him through right up here. And she's like, he's just like, the look on his face is, oh, didn't see that coming. And that's when she tells him, that she's always been his. She's always belonged to him. And you're like, see? I didn't know that. I didn't know she was one of the servants, but she is. So, after she kills him, Damien blows up that room with her in it. Because he don't care. You know what I mean? I think Mark was the only person that he killed that he had any sympathy for, love for, or care for, was Mark. So she kills Rich with them, and then Damien blows up the room with her and all the evidence in it. And then he comes back outside and he stands on the steps of the museum and he looks down at his driver, and the driver walks around and opens the back door for him. And the look that he gives him, and the look that the driver gives him, and another protector, So, yeah, that's when the movie ends. It is definitely a 10.10 out of 10 to me. It is my favorite. You have no idea how much I had to pay for this shirt. Because they are so hard to find. It's just damn near impossible to find a Damien shirt from the Omen II. But I really love this one. Damien, Omen II. And like I said, it's silk. It feels so good. But yeah. So that was Damien, Omen II. And I will be back with the next one. Please tell me what you think about Damien, Omen II. Where does it sit? If you would like to give your rankings of the Omen, I would love to hear them. Read them. And what do you think about Damien Omen 2? What's your favorite kill? And yeah, I will see you in the next one. Love you, miss you. Bye-bye. And always remember, and never forget. And we're probably going to have to repeat this one every time. You are a very, very special person. Don't let anyone ever tell you any different. Support indie horror. Support physical media. Love you, miss you, bye. And you are very special, even if you are not the Antichrist. I will see you in the next. Damien, Omen II was brought to you by Red Rusty Enterprises. See you in the next one. Bye-bye. Crow.